Okay, we're going to call the February 6, 2025 Corcoran Planning Commission meeting to begin. I'll start with roll call. Brummond is here. Commissioner Hargreaves?
Here.
Commissioner Kozicki?
Here.
Commissioner Lind?
Here.
And Commissioner Yang is absent. At this time, I'd like to invite all of you to stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. It's a nice new backdrop, I'm noting. It makes a great picture backdrop when you have those awards handed out. Okay, at this time, I would just like to ask staff or the commissioners if there are any amendments that need to be made to tonight's agenda.
Madam Chair, staff has no amendments to tonight's agenda.
Okay, and if the commissioners don't have any amendments, then I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll motion to approve. Second.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay. And at this point in time, we will open up the floor to the public to participate in what we call the open forum. This is an opportunity for the public to address the members of the commission with any item that's not currently on tonight's agenda. And I would go over the rules of decorum, but I feel like all of our participants are here for items that are on the agenda tonight. So if there's no one here, then I will make a motion to close the open forum.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, and then at this point in time, we are going to look over the commission meeting minutes from December 5th, which was the last time that we had a meeting. If there aren't any changes that need to be made or any items to address, then I will entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
Entertain or make, sorry.
Entertain, but I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
All right, all those in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, all that business out of the way brings us to tonight's new business. And each of our new business items is a public comment opportunity, but we're going to begin with this, I'm saying it correctly if I say Spaith Garage conditional use permit? Okay, perfect. And we're going to start with a staff report, and then we'll move into the public hearing.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, item 6A tonight is the public hearing for the Spaith Garage conditional use permit. The request itself comes from Jordan Spaith, and he's requesting approval of a conditional use permit for an accessory building that exceeds a building sidewall height of 10 feet in the side yard of his property at 7090 Jubert Lane. The property itself is currently zoned rural residential and guided rural/ag residential. The structure itself is planned to be placed in the side yard and exceeds all of the required setbacks. The applicant's requesting the structure be 2,720 square feet where 2,750 square feet is allowed, so just under 30 feet of that maximum. The proposed sidewall height for this application is 18 feet, which exceeds that 10-foot limit, but can be allowed through a conditional use permit. The building overall doesn't exceed the overall structure height limit of 35 feet in the rural residential district. The applicant's proposing white steel panels for the siding. That may be approved through a certificate of compliance. And from the looks of it, everything looks like it would be approved. We just need the applicant to confirm that the siding has been applied with a factory applied color coding system that protects against any fading or degradation. And the proposed eave and overhang length of this structure is 2 feet, and the minimum is 1 foot requirement. Staff recommends the following conditions of approval. The structure cannot be used for commercial or accessory living purposes without first obtaining the necessary city approvals. And a condition of approval should also include that the applicants confirm that those siding panels, so that we can confirm that for the certificate of compliance. So at this point, staff recommends that the commission open the public hearing and take testimony, and we recommend approval of the draft resolution.
Thank you, Dwight. Okay, at this point in time, we will go ahead and open the public hearing regarding the Spaith Garage conditional use permit. I would like to give the applicant, we do have the report, but if you wanted to address the commission, you're certainly more than welcome to, but you don't have to. That's up to you. And otherwise, anyone else, I'm guessing, there isn't going to be anyone speaking on this issue. Did you want to say, or you're good with the application?
I don't know what you want me to say, but I could talk.
No, it's no requirement, because this will go, I have, anyway, there's no requirement to speak.
Okay.
We will just ask you questions if there are any that come up.
Sure.
We just would like to give you the opportunity.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Okay, all right, so then we will go ahead and I will make a motion to close the public hearing.
I'll second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, and so at this point in time, this is an issue that we have had come up a few times, but I do want to give you guys the opportunity to ask any questions or have any discussion. So now's the opportunity. If you have it, otherwise if you don't, let me know. Like if you're,
I would just ask staff if this is a common occurrence. Is there a desire at maybe a policy level to change this?
this is actually one of our, this has been identified as one of the priorities for the commission
Perfect.
to be addressed.
Great,
Yes.
no
Good-
question.
Good question.
What typically can occur in an accessory structure?
Typically storage, or if it's a personal workshop or things of that nature, but if it begins to be used for like a commercial use or for a place to stay or a place to live in, then that's where it starts to require those additional approvals from the city for either one of those.
Can you have toilets in an accessory structure?
We do, yeah, like we have a barn with a bathroom in it, yep.
Okay.
And so like a lot of folks with an accessory, I mean, I won't speak, I guess, for them, and in this, I will allow you to address the reason you'd like water out there if you want, but it certainly isn't an uncommon thing in accessory
I'm
structures.
just asking a question.
Yeah,
You're allowed to have one within your accessory structure. It's when we start seeing the kitchenette or the bedroom or things like that where we start to have those sort of triggers of, it might start looking more like an accessory dwelling unit than it does just an accessory structure.
As far as the height, it exceeds the height, it's gonna be white. I kind of looked around, does an accessory building have to match the main building color-wise, or does it not matter?
An accessory dwelling unit has to match the aesthetic of the principal structure, but an
Okay.
accessory unit, or accessory structure itself doesn't have that
Okay,
requirement.
so the height's not a problem for neighbors. It didn't look like it was gonna be really visible from any of the neighbors when I looked at it, so I assume it's not an issue with,
No,
okay,
I talked to most of them, they were fine
Okay.
before I did this.
yeah, okay.
okay, so at this time, then I would like to make a motion to approve City File 24-046 for the Spaith Garage conditional use permit.
And I'll second.
All those in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, and then that'll be a recommendation that goes on to council, and this will go on their agenda next, and it will likely be in a consent agenda. But the staff can answer any questions for you if you have any regarding that.
Later, or now?
We can chat offline about it.
Okay. You guys need me for anything else?
No?
No.
Thank you so much for coming, we appreciate your time. And at this point in time, we're gonna go to our next new business item, which is the Northeast District Design Guidelines Zoning Ordinance Amendment. And we're gonna begin with a staff report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Next slide. This is a request from Hempel Development LLC for a zoning ordinance text amendment to 3 standards in the Northeast District. They came in front of the council in March of last year and identified these issues. I think at the time, they and staff were hoping that commercial industrial ordinance updates would be done before they came in with a formal application, but for a variety of things related to staff workload, that hasn't been completed, so they are proceeding with this request to make 3 changes. 1, to the building material standards in the industrial district, 2, to the parking setbacks along common lot lines, and 3, to landscape islands. And I'll talk about each of those, but I wanted to note that if amended, it would apply to all the properties in the Northeast District. If you recall, the Northeast District has a set of standards that's a little different from in the rest of the ordinance. For example, we adopted higher standards for landscaping to kind of use that as a test, that if it worked well, we would apply that in the future across the city. So this was sort of a test for a number of things. So again, it would apply in the Northeast District only, not the remainder of the city. Next slide. So the first is an issue of building materials. When the Northeast standards were adopted in 2022, the standards indicate that only precast panels are allowed as a Class 3 material, which is an accent material. But the image in the ordinance has this image from Brooklyn Park calling it Class 1 material, which is precast. And that's a very standard material in an industrial district. And I think that was a mistake in the ordinance. I think the ordinance language was really focused on commercial and residential and erroneously didn't provide the exemption or exception for the industrial properties. The precast material itself comes in a variety of styles, and I included in the packet all the different textures and finishes that you may find for precast. In talking with other staff members, we've developed an ordinance that only allows the smooth finish concrete panels rather than some of the other raked or aggregate materials that you do see in town. We do have other tilt-up materials in Corcoran, and one could argue about whether those are appropriate or not. In fact, just south of here, we have other precast materials south of this site. But we felt like in the Northeast District, the new higher standards, it would be appropriate to keep it limited to the precast smooth finish. That is what Hempel is proposing for their building. And so the draft language would allow smooth finish concrete in the I-1 district only. Other precast material styles would still be allowed as a Class 3 material, though. Next slide. The second issue is about parking. It's less clear on the screen than I had hoped, the image, but the applicant's asking to amend the code to allow shared parking with a 0 setback. So in a multi-building development, this example is Arbor Lakes and Maple Grove right on 494. 694. I use that because I think you're probably all familiar with it. You can see the buildings back up to each other and they share a parking zone or a loading zone in between buildings, and there's no green space between that. There's no setback from them. That's very, very common. We allow that in the code in the GMU, the General Mixed Use District, which is the district along County Road 30, but only there. And I'm not sure why that is. We do recommend that we allow the 0 setback where it's a master plan development with a common lot line separating 2 or more parking lots. And so we've provided language in the draft ordinance for your consideration this evening. Next issue is related to parking lot islands. There you go, parking bays. So our ordinance requires, and this is again something new in the Northeast District. In the Northeast District, we require parking lot islands every 15 spaces and on the end caps of parking lots. We didn't exempt loading areas. Those areas are typically less visible, they're screened by buildings, and they exist for truck trailer maneuvering. And those islands can make that very difficult for those large vehicles to maneuver in that zone. And so we are suggesting an exemption just for those truck trailer parking lots, for those truck trailer bays. Any passenger vehicle parking lots are still subject to those standards. And if you look at the images, again, this is a different image in Brooklyn Park, again, shows a 0 setback for parking, but also you can see that passenger vehicles are required to have landscaped islands, but again, not in those truck vehicle things. So the two images were just different cities to show an example. That's really industry standard, and we think it's appropriate as requested by the applicant to make those modifications to the Northeast District standards. And the next slide, again, for those reasons, we do think it's appropriate. If this would go to the council at their next, or at their meeting at the end of the month, and if approved, the applicant would modify their development application to reflect the new ordinance language, and we expect their formal development application to be in front of you next month at your March 3rd Planning Commission meeting. So next slide. This is a public hearing. We do recommend that you open the public hearing and take comments, but we do recommend approval of the draft ordinance as included in your packet and the resolution with the findings of fact. Happy to answer any questions, and the applicant is here as well, Madam Chair.
Thank you. At this point in time, we will open the public hearing regarding this zoning ordinance amendment to the Northeast District Design Guidelines. If you would like the opportunity to address the commission, you're more than welcome to, but you're not required.
Happy to answer questions, but.
Perfect. Thank you. And at this point in time, is there anyone else who is here to address the zoning ordinance amendment? I don't see anyone else, so at this point in time, I will entertain a motion to, I'll just make the motion, it'll be faster, to close the public hearing.
Second.
And all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, and at this point in time, then, we will open it up for commission discussion, questions. Who would like to go first?
Is there any history of why these ordinances were done this way that would
Yeah.
cause
Do I-
us to say, no, we don't want to change it?
Yeah, when we adopted the Northeast District standards, we were trying to adopt a higher level of design, and I think this was really just looking more at the mixed use and commercial areas in the Northeast District, and really not working through all of the issues related to an industrial project. And so when this project came forward, they identified a couple of issues that they requested, and as we met at the staff level at our Development Review Committee, staff has no objection to the changes and believe they're appropriate for an industrial user like this.
And one other question, sharing the parking lots was one of the requests. Does that just mean there's more uninterrupted asphalt parking lot there without buffers in between? Is
Yeah,
that basically-
in those truck loading bays, then there is a lot line that runs down the middle of that truck loading area. But rather than having a green space in there to separate the two, that would be used by both. And as part of any development proposal, they would need to have a cross-access easement and maintenance agreement to ensure that that area is maintained by both lot owners.
And it just makes it easier to maneuver the large trucks in that.
Very common on these multi-phase projects, both for commercial and industrial.
When there is a developer developing more than one of the lots, but it's not going to be the same company necessarily is what they're talking about when they meet in lot lines. I do have to say, it feels rational. I really, really, really struggle with because part of what the intent that went into the Northeast District Design Guidelines was not just like a higher standard, but overall it was supposed to take greater care of the environmental factors. So like the impervious surface portion. So I understand it makes sense not to require sort of a buffer space where you know that lot line is going to be utilized, the bays are going to be facing each other and they're going to be utilized for the same purpose. I'm just wondering then, does it make any sense to ask for a greater environmental component somewhere else? within that larger development. Having been a part of the Northeast District Design Guideline implementation process, like when we were considering it, we were hoping that there weren't going to be any issues where applicants came in and then issues came up, but I think it's sort of how it goes, right? You feel like, okay, here's where we missed, or here's where we missed. But I do remember that overall that was just one of the greatest goals in kind of requiring some of those higher design guidelines. So that would be, I don't have a proposal, right, which I wish that I did, in terms of what that would potentially look like. But again, I understand the rationale of, because in using a truck bay like that, it makes a lot of sense. But I do struggle with the fact that it's just going to be a massive impervious surface.
Are there drainage issues with it not having any kind of a permeable surface?
I don't think there's drainage issues other than the fact that however that groundwater is being collected, it's not in the ground. So, but in terms of like, I don't think that they would design the unit in such a way that you would have standing water. I'm pretty confident that they would do a phenomenal job to make sure that all of that water went somewhere. It's just, you know, that it would just be paved. But again, I don't have a fantastic proposal because I'm trying to remember what other requirements there were in particular in the commercial district, because I think some of them were to hit so many boxes in terms of environmental, and so that's where I'm having a hard time fitting this one piece into the bigger picture.
Yeah, let me highlight some of those.
Thank you. I would appreciate
Some of
that.
your questions. So you're absolutely right. One of the things was to make it more sustainable development. And so one piece in the Northeast District is that developers have to provide at least 3 resiliency options, and those could be xeriscaping, rain gardens and bioretention systems, landscaping with native species, green rooftops, EV parking, urban gardens, alternate energy, and some aesthetic design related to plazas. And so I can tell you that this applicant is meeting those
Okay.
standards, and he can probably remember off the top of his head. I haven't really started the review. I know they have EV charging stations. I know we've got rain gardens. I know we've got native plants in the landscaping components. We also have a requirement in the Northeast District for a chloride management plan, which is something new that you're probably very familiar with, Madam Chair, that we don't require in the rest of the city to manage chloride going into our waterways. And part of that means thinking about snow storage as part of the design to limit salt use in a parking lot, so you don't put the snow pile in the southeast corner where it's going to melt across the parking lot and require more salt, is one of the things that's in that, for example. The couple of other things that are unique to the Northeast District are some of the stormwater management requirements. They just go a little bit above what we require in other areas, and that we work through with our engineering team. We do require native plantings in the Northeast District. We don't in other areas. We also encourage, and I know this is near and dear to your heart, moving away from Kentucky bluegrass and providing more natural lawns in the Northeast. Not required, but we do incent that in the Northeast District. And then just some additional parking standards related to landscape buffers. And so while we do miss that in this zone, between the 2 buildings, if you adopt that change, we're making up for it because we're requiring landscape parking lot islands in the Northeast District that we do not require in other districts. So for the passenger vehicles, that would remain.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that big picture.
Is this an example of the shared space between the 2 buildings?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't remember that picture. Let me look at that.
Yeah, because it shows the 2 large buildings, and then it looks like it's separated into almost 3 components in the
I think
asphalt
that-
parking
Is
lot.
that off 610?
Is that-
That's this project.
I was
Oh,
going to say,
that's this
that's a
project. Okay.
rendering of this project. Yes.
It looks like it's already there.
Yeah, nice rendering. Yeah. So normally, the way it is now, there would have to be some kind of a buffer in this center part.
Yeah, where you see
Here.
that white line sort of, which is a drainage
Would that be a problem to maneuver the trucks around? It looks like there's a fair amount of space there, even if you put a buffer in the middle there.
Well, I think when you have those large tractor trailers and the amount of turning radiuses, it does get
Set them
challenging.
back in.
And it's unusual to have that in these types of developments.
Is there any way that you can increase the natural vegetation at the ends of the parking areas, just to, I mean, it's one thing to have all the asphalt that is, you're draining the water into a culvert system or a sewer system.
Their site plan.
But if there's some way you could conceal it from passerbys, I think that would help with me.
If you go to the slide 38. I just want to, I think you can, I want to make sure I understand what you're asking. So along the streets, both on the north and the south, and again, we're not reviewing this development proposal yet, but there is landscaping and berming along the street that's going to provide.
Yeah, I guess what I'm not talking about the front, I'm talking about the sides at the ends of those large parking areas.
Two things, there will be landscaping along the street that's going to screen that, but if you're asking, could we put an end cap island on those parking zones in the middle? I think the answer is yes. The idea was not to have it every 15 stalls, which makes it very difficult. But they're showing an end cap, if you look at the image on page 38, Dwight's desperately trying to pull it on the screen, but that's the image, Commissioner, you were showing. And if
I
you
guess what I'm
see-
talking about is at these ends right here is populated with as much vegetation as possible, not so much over here, but right here.
So just to clarify too, because this is, what's actually under consideration is a zoning ordinance amendment, we would have to find something that language, if that was the direction you wanted to go, language that made that applicable for all applications that came in, rather than just this specific site, because we're not reviewing the application for this project. So I'm not saying that that can't be proposed, I'm just saying think a little bit more, less specific and more general, how would you fit that in if it wasn't this particular instance, but if another commercial application or any industrial, application was coming in and they're asking to have that zero setback where the bays come together, what language would you use to ask for larger screening, or, you know what,
So my
Do you know what I'm
point,
saying?
and again, we're not reviewing the site plan, so so I want to be really careful about that. But this image, which is their site plan, shows end caps of landscape islands in the middle, which will provide a little bit of screening and also control that parking area in the middle. And so that is not in the code. You could certainly add in the draft language, you could add that in. But thank you. We cannot be reviewing their development application tonight. The question is, does it make sense to have landscape islands when we have tractor trailers trying to maneuver? And does it make sense to have an island in the middle separating two users that really are functionally using the same spaces?
and
And again, I'm not talking about this and this, I'm just talking about when you have this condition is at the end of this massive parking area is to vegetate this area to
Yeah, I
decrease.
think that's a site plan. I don't think you can
No,
tie
I don't
the-
think it is a site plan.
the
I think
setback?
anytime you have a large parking area, you should be able to conceal the end of that parking area. And I
Okay,
don't
the
think
two-
it's specific to this development. I think it's anytime you have a large development like that with the parking lot oriented like that, I think you can populate the end of it with vegetation.
You have two issues that they're asking about. Do you need to have a setback between the shared lot line? That's
The
question
shared lot
one.
line is, now you took the image away.
That's one question. And the second question
No,
is,
the
do you
shared-
need to
just
have
one second,
islands
one
every
second.
15 stalls?
The shared lot line right through here, correct?
Yep.
Okay. That's fine. I don't have any problem with that. I'm just talking about the ends of those large, parking areas. And if you give me if you give me some time, I could come up with general language that would address that. But we're talking about it now, and I'm letting you know what my thoughts are.
Would this be some, I don't know, guys,
Yeah, absolutely.
would this be something that we would handle at the March meeting? 'Cause, I mean, we're happy to keep the landscaping out there.
Well, that's what I'm trying to
Yep.
say, and I feel like the commissioners maybe not hearing what I'm saying, is that we're looking at the code, and so we can't look at that site plan, and I'm trying to figure out what the issue is, if it's about islands or setbacks, and then we can modify or not
Right.
not recommend approval of the change.
Right. I think if I could try my hand at clarifying, I think that there is not an issue with the lack of islands every 15 feet. I think that there isn't an issue with the shared lot line for the zero setback in these parking bays. I think that the ask is that a language be added that when there is a zero setback for the parking bays, that we have increased screening over the ends of where those bays sit. That is my feeble attempt at
That's
coming
pretty
up
good.
with
That's pretty
language.
good.
Am I understanding it correctly?
yes.
Because the ask is not for this site. You're saying that whenever this issue would be under consideration, that you would always like to see increased vegetation at the, does that make sense? I don't know how we
Yeah, I don't
could do
think we're
that.
I don't think we're gonna come up with language tonight. I don't know how you would, on the fly, I don't know how you would articulate that. I think, if we had a site plan that we were looking at,
Right.
we could kind of look at that. So I think maybe, I think it's bad language to say this, but we could look at something different for the council. You could say something like direct staff to develop language to require additional perimeter landscaping where the zero setback is waived.
Or
something like
screening,
that.
or you
That would be
only want
fine.
vegetation. I'm
Yeah.
asking for a clarification. If they wanted to screen some other way, you just want it screened, or you want increased vegetation?
Both.
Okay, so I don't know if going the direction of screening language makes it easier. I don't know, but,
Yeah, I think what I would suggest is the direction is where there's zero setback for the parking bays, request that the applicant shall provide additional screening at the perimeter of the site beyond minimum ordinance requirements.
okay.
Yeah, that would be fine.
Even though in that language, again, you cannot require that additional vegetation be placed specifically where you want it. That would have to be at
Yeah,
a per
I
site.
understand. Yeah,
Okay,
I understand.
okay.
What-
Go ahead.
Well, would it make sense for, well, if we're changing it as a policy, I was gonna say for every, is there a way to do it percentage wise? Like, we're removing, X percent of what would be landscaping or whatever by not having the 15 stall requirement and no setback. And for that, then you increase your percentage buffering on the perimeter by X percent. But if it's a policy change that maybe doesn't work. Did that make any sense at all, or was okay?
Yeah, you're looking at trying to throw some equation on it
Yeah.
Yeah,
instead
it
of
should
just
be a give
which
and
way,
take.
yeah,
Measurable tool,
Yes.
did you meet it or not? I appreciate that.
right,
Yeah.
instead of just
So-
increased, which is.
Because I
maybe
don't
you're-
want,
Oh.
what I don't want is these, in industrial, what I think our goals are, is to minimize minimize the environmental impact, maximize the aesthetic. And by doing that, I think for us giving no setback requirement, there should be a give on perimeter landscaping and maximizing the appeal. And that's obviously happening, but how do we make sure that we feel comfortable with what we're doing?
Yeah, I mean, one thing, I think I have to think about this.
Yeah.
But, what I think I hear you saying is, and I think Commissioner's talking about something else, but you're talking about if we eliminate the island requirements, let's make up that green space elsewhere on site, I think is kind of where you're going.
Yep.
And I feel like that's a measure that we could do, that's maybe measurable, more so than add more landscaping or something. But I don't know exactly yet, I have to sort of
Yeah,
think
we have to
about
think
it.
about it, but I think we should do that.
But I like that idea, and I think it's probably feasible. It's weird because this is the one industrial site, and I can tell you that they have about 20% hardcover on this site, so it's a lot of green space on this site, so.
Okay.
Yes,
You know, yeah, normally we're like 33% impervious coverage, a more typical
Yeah.
industrial site, I guess.
But you're not always building in Corcoran. Just kidding.
But I like that, something measurable could be applied, to site, because sites are going to vary in their size, and, so I think that a measurable is the direction to go. But then I think the other part of that is there probably is impervious surface limits already in here, and so we also want to make sure we're not being redundant. I think that's
Yeah.
important.
right.
That's true.
So,
So I hear what the commission is attempting to do, and I think I'm hearing this idea. I like the idea for the island piece, to waive the islands to make up that the island square footage of green space elsewhere on site. Feels, I mean, I know you just threw it out there, but feels manageable. I want to work through that before the council meeting, but that feels manageable. I also think we could just, if there's a zero setback for parking bays, add additional screening at the perimeter of the site beyond minimum ordinance requirements. Probably is something we could flesh out a little more specifically, because I know we like to have numbers that we can check.
is the loss of setback, right, like whatever would have to be, I'm wondering if, because we're at a zero setback, is whatever number that's usually used to measure that, is that somehow help in a measurable
Well,
regarding?
that's the same thing as the island. You could apply that to both if you wanted to make that recommendation.
Yep.
I don't think that it, oh, go ahead.
No, I don't mean to interrupt you.
I was just gonna say, I don't know that we have to, because we're also rational, understanding that this really is how it functions, so I don't know that we need to stack. That's what I'm trying to say. But I feel like, if we could somehow get a measurable amount out of one of those, it would,
Yeah, and I think based on what we're trying to do, what's important is where it goes. Like the perimeter, visibility to the road, et cetera, whatever we decide that is, like, how do we maximize the impact of that give?
I'm gonna try to play architect on the fly. or
Yeah, do
not.
you have an idea?
Well, I just want to point out, so, this is my best attempt. If we were doing a typical industrial building with a landscape buffer in the middle, trucks need 120 feet to kind of maneuver to back into the building. So by doing the shared truck court, we actually reduce the pervious area because they're moving back and forth, or the impervious area, sorry. So if we did the landscape, we would have to actually either, there'd have to be 120 feet, 240 feet, versus the shared truck court, which can maneuver with 200 feet. So it actually, by sharing, you are.
because you're putting your buildings
Same.
closer together is what you're
Yeah,
saying.
so the trucks, I mean,
Yeah.
they're crossing property lines, and,
Sure.
But it's less
so it's
impervious
actually less impervious.
overall.
And we appreciate that you guys are doing that. Do you feel confident that that is something that every proposal comes in to do, or is it something that we have to spell out?
Well,
Just wondering.
yeah, and do we feel like that loses aesthetic?
Well, I mean, you'd actually have a larger area then.
Right,
With,
you
you know,
do.
just a landscape island down the middle or something like that, or if you did the landscape stalls would be, that's really challenging for
Yep.
trucks, especially in the winter with snow plowing.
And depending on how full your docks are, or your bays are.
I think I'm all for less impervious surface overall. And you said you're already at like 20% versus a
Right.
lot of these developments. What is Corcoran's? Do they have a maximum impervious surface amount?
We do, and in the industrial
it
district,
30?
it is pretty high.
So, and he's below that already, not
The
not that
industrial
this is for
district,
his,
it's a 70% maximum impervious surface coverage.
but that includes the tops of the buildings and
It
the
does.
asphalt parking lots and everything,
Yep.
so.
So-
And I think with the 20%, you're talking about just the parking area. Yeah.
Well, no, and
Your
building.
site
And the
and
building,
building,
yeah.
his site,
Oh, because there's a big wetland area here, is that?
and some upland that's not being developed. So compared to some other industrial sites that were on the screen, I think they'll be lower. But the code would allow 70% impervious surface coverage. Again, we're not talking about his project.
Right.
But I think the point is well taken that if you put the island between the two buildings, you have more impervious surface.
Yes.
Eliminating the island actually reduces impervious surface, which is what you said was important.
It's just a bigger area.
It's an
Unbroken.
unbroken area,
Yeah.
that's right.
Right.
It's a great point.
But
I'm
I-
just bringing up that it looks different, but if we, back to the facts of what we care about, like, that makes sense. I mean, that's a great point. I wouldn't have known that, so.
Yeah, I do appreciate it. I just don't know that I have full confidence that everybody comes in with a plan that doesn't try to maximize. So I'm wondering if it's still just worth thinking about something
Yeah.
for the
Maybe
code.
maybe we could write in something, he said they need 120 feet, so whatever his area
The
is here,
shared
maybe
bay.
when you have a shared one, there's a maximum footage between buildings that we could write into there, that keeps them from making it bigger than it needs to be.
Yeah, I mean,
For the
truck
trucks to
turning
maneuver.
radius is our standard regardless of who the
Right.
user is,
And
I think, so.
He said 120 feet for that,
That's a
so,
pretty industry standard.
yeah,
I mean, sometimes you can get down to 110, but it gets a little tight.
yeah. You want to,
Just don't like it.
you don't want to make it difficult, especially with snow and.
Does anyone else have any other?
I just have a question on, does the design guidelines have different policy if it's, a single user or multiple tenants? Do we have different guidelines on design standards based on that, or no?
No,
Okay,
not for these issues we're talking about tonight.
okay. I didn't know, for example, like business park, when I hear that, I think communal spaces that all tenants would use, resources, things like that. And I didn't know if we call something, I know this is industrial zone, I'm just wondering if we brought out any design guidelines difference between if we're hosting 5 companies in there or 1, so, no,
We do not.
okay. I think the smooth surface, better looking the better. Love that.
And I guess my only point of clarification on that, is that just in the commercial or is that in all zoning
So
areas?
as we've drafted it, the tilt-up precast smooth face is only allowed in the I-1 industrial
okay.
district. It would be allowed in the other districts in the Northeast District as a Class 3 or complementary material,
Sure.
but not as the primary material.
Thank you. Okay, if no one else has any other comments, I don't want to cut anybody short, but I want to respect our time. Then what we're in effect doing is we are making a motion to approve City File 24-047 with the language, directing staff to look at language for how do I try to concise? A measurable additional landscape around the perimeter for the lack of parking islands and potentially increased vegetation or screening around the zero setback. Is that adequately? Okay, so I have made that motion.
I second it.
Okay, and all those in favor, say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay,
Thank you.
thanks so much.
See you in a month.
And at this point in time, we get to move on to any other business that staff might have or any updates from our council liaison. No
Madam
updates.
Chair, no updates from staff.
Okay.
Open, you guys get questions for me? Council-wise? The summary, Dwight, you have in the packet with quick trip and everything else was outstanding. Thank you. A lot of good information.
I did want to ask about, did I miss it, or is there the St. Thomas Apostle concept plan? Is that, it doesn't go through planning?
For a concept plan, that only goes to city council.
Oh, and
for
then it comes
informal
back once
feedback.
it's a real
Yeah,
deal?
once it's a formal application, it'll come back. to-
Got it.
And
Okay.
Lindsay, you can stop in and talk to them. They've got
Sure.
pretty good rendering and drawing of what they're hoping to accomplish.
Yeah, I know they had the festival and,
Yep.
got it.
It
Yep.
hasn't changed much, so.
I did want to know what the council's feedback was, and I can go back and listen,
That's all
so
right.
I don't
Go
want to
ahead.
drain the time, but
No, go ahead.
on the Lowther subdivision,
Yes.
how did it go? Thoughts?
I believe, Dwight, you can correct me if I'm wrong, they have submitted a application for comp plan change?
Yeah, right
Okay,
now,
going that way, go
they've
ahead.
submitted just the comp plan amendment to re-guide the property from existing residential to conservation residential. And if that gets approved, then I believe their plan would be at that point to come through with the actual plat for the subdivision.
Yeah, it says 22
Yep.
lots on 10 acres.
Instead of the 3 or 4 or whatever that they could go after. They've told us, me too, that they are trying to get on the low end of, so.
Yeah, the density of that would be
2 to 5. Or is it 2 to 3?
for the conservation, whereas the low density residential would be 3 to 5.
3 to 5.
And
they could go.
the existing density that would be allowed with the existing residential is just what's there now.
I see the pathway here, I'm just, was curious how the informal feedback session went.
Okay, if there is nobody else who has anything for Councilmember Camp, then I'll adjourn tonight's meeting. All right, meeting adjourned.
We have to have Madam Chair, I think we have to have a motion.
Oh, I'm sorry. God, you guys, this is the second time I've done that
You
too.
just-
I am like,
She's ready to get it done.
Wanted to
Ah.
get enthusiasm.
okay.
I was kinda
I
like-
will make a motion to adjourn tonight's meeting. I can't just make that decision on my own, nor would I want to, but if you all agree.
I second.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, thank you.